This introduction to nucleic acids is going to be relatively short because we've gone over this material a lot with DNA and RNA already. But just a quick review, the nucleic acids are the things that compose DNA and RNA. They have three main parts. They have the phosphate group, they have the sugar, and the base. Of these things, the phosphate group's the only one that's really stable. The sugar, stable meaning like always the same. The sugar is going to vary, so if it's DNA, it's deoxyribose sugar. If it's RNA, it's just ribose sugar. And then, of course, the base varies. That can be adenine, thymine, cytosine, or guanine. The logical part of this is that it contains the genetic information, of course. It's your DNA. And as we talked about during that chapter, it directs growth and development. So all of the things that go on inside your body, all of the proteins that are made, all of your phenotypes that you express, all of that is due to your genes, and it's due to those genes being expressed through the process of protein synthesis. One of the few things I don't like about this diagram that I stole all this stuff from is this portion here. It makes it look like you can't get nucleic acids from your foods, and that's incorrect. I mean, you can get nucleic acids from a lot of things, especially like raw foods that you eat. So if you're eating stuff like raw vegetables and raw fruits, those are going to have a substantial amount of nucleic acids in them. One of the things about genetic information is that it's kind of fragile. So, for example, if you were going to eat something like raw fish, like tuna fish, which is generally uncooked, like that's going to have good nucleic acids in it. If you eat something like beef that's been cooked, it will still have the component parts for all of these things, but the heat of going through and cooking it does something called decharacterization. Like it breaks down the molecules, and they don't have their original form anymore. So I think that might have been part of the reasoning behind this portion of the diagram. Another thing to keep in mind is a lot of processed foods aren't going to have any of the original nucleic acids in them. Again, it could have some components of the nucleic acids, but they've long since been broken down through the process of packaging everything and just going through all of the synthetic stuff that we do to food. The last column, of course, DNA and RNA, really straightforward. If you remember the DNA and RNA models, you got DNA on the right, the double helix, RNA on the left. Just to point out the important differences, RNA is single-stranded, whereas DNA is double-stranded. And then, of course, DNA has thymine, whereas RNA has uracil, with a difference in some of those nucleotides, which are the building blocks of these nucleic acids. The last thing to talk about is just the nucleotides real quick. I mentioned some of this earlier with like what's going to stay the same and what's going to change between some of the nucleic acids. But the nucleotides will differ. So you've got adenine, thymine, cytosine, and guanine. This breaks it down into purines and pyrimidines. So if you remember the difference there, the purines have 2 of the carbon rings, whereas pyrimidines only have 1, and this is how they match up. A always goes with T, so it's 1 purine with 1 pyrimidine, and then C always goes with G, same thing, 1 purine with 1 pyrimidine from the other side. This is part of what gives DNA its helical nature, is that they're always matching up together. If you were to get 2 purines bonded together or 2 pyrimidines, that's one of those genetic mutations, and oftentimes things like that are fixed and easily identified by DNA polymerase during the process of DNA replication. So I know that this one was kind of quick, but this is really just an overview. Everything that I've talked about in this video we discussed when we were going through that process of DNA and talking about how the information from DNA is taken out and distributed to the rest of your cell. So just go through and answer the questions when this one's over. But overall, the main focus for this chapter should be on the proteins, the carbohydrates, and the lipids. Those are the ones that are mostly new, and that's where I think you should be spending most of your time. Hopefully, most of this information anyway was just a review for you. So as always, thank you for watching, and I will see you in class.